Destiny 2 is really good, but it's a little weird and kind of unconventional, and if this is your first time playing a Destiny game, it might be a little overwhelming. Today on gameranx, here are 10 things first-time Destiny 2 players should know. Starting off at number 10, so the first thing you're probably thinking is, wait, I didn't play Destiny 1, am I going to understand Destiny 2? Well, yes and no. While Destiny 1 didn't really have a strong narrative, there were some things that happened, and you also met all the characters that are in Destiny 2, and you learned some of the lore, but none of this is really fleshed out in the first game. Cade 6, for example, he's all over Destiny 2 promo stuff, and he's been in Destiny since day one, and he's always been voiced by Nathan Fillion, but he didn't actually get any of the spotlight until the release of the third expansion. So focusing on supporting characters hasn't always been the first thing on Bungie's to-do list. Destiny 2 definitely has way more story elements than Destiny 1 did in the base game and in all the expansions. So to give you a final answer to whether or not you have to play Destiny 1 to play Destiny 2, well, no, you don't. Maybe go watch a quick video about the story or read a summary of it just to get an idea of what happened in the first game. But even if you don't do that, you'll be perfectly fine just jumping into Destiny 2. And moving on to number 9, so you just started Destiny 2 up, and now you have to pick which of the 3 classes you're going to play as. All 3 control the same, but each one is entirely different when it comes to their subclasses, their supers, and their abilities. So which one do you pick? First up, you have the Titan. They're pretty much the soldier class. They're big and hulking and wear heavy-ass armor. The 3 subclasses they have access to are Striker, Sunbreaker, and Sentinel. Striker gives you an arc ground pound as your super. Doing so takes out any enemy that is unfortunately close enough to you to be damaged by it. Sunbreaker gives you the ability to throw solar engulfed hammers. Enemies get damaged by either catching it right to the face or being hit by the AoE damage. There's also Sentinel, where you essentially become Captain America and you run around with a void shield, either striking enemies with it head on or throwing it. Then there's a Hunter, who has Arc Strider, Night Stalker, and Gunslinger available as their subclasses. Arc Strider gives you an arc staff and you fly around like a ninja attacking enemies. Night Stalker gives you a void bow and arrow which can tether enemies and keep them from moving, which is super helpful against certain bosses, and this really helps in a strike or in a raid. Then there's the one subclass that I'm sure you all know and already love. This is what Cade 6 rocks, Gunslinger. Gunslinger lets you call upon the power of the Golden Gun, which is a hand cannon that can fire off a few solar shots that have a crazy damage buff. Then there are the Warlocks that have access to Dawnblade, Voidwalker, and Stormcaller. Dawnblade is actually pretty similar to the Titan Sunbreaker, but instead of solar hammers, you get a solar sword, and this has an up-close and personal attack and also a ranged attack. Voidwalker gives you access to Nova Bomb, where you jump up and fire a giant projectile void bomb. And finally, there's the Stormcaller, which is the Warlock's Arc subclass. You summon the power of lightning and you can shoot it from your fingertips like a Sith Lord. This is a really powerful subclass, and if you're rocking Warlock in Crucible and you gain this super, you're gonna get a few kills. And moving on to number 8, with Destiny 2, Bungie actually changed up how the weapons work. Not drastically, but still changed them. You still have all the same weapon types there, I don't need to list them all, but they're all there, plus some new ones. But what did change is your loadout. It used to be primary, secondary, and heavy. Now it's kinetic, energy, and power. Kinetic is your plain primary weapon that doesn't have any elemental burns. Then you have elemental weapons, which will have one of 3 burns on them: arc, void, or solar. And then the power slot houses your heavy weapons, which are machine guns, swords, fusion rifles, rocket launchers, grenade launchers, and now sniper rifles and shotguns. And your heavy weapons will also have elemental burns attached to them as well. So you've heard me mention elemental burns more than one time at this point, and for those that don't know, burns are an elemental damage that are attached to certain weapons. You have arc, solar, and void, each one being color-coded with either blue, orange, or purple. You'll notice that certain enemies have either a blue, orange, or purple shield. So if you're fighting an enemy with a purple shield, you can use a weapon that has a void burn on it, and it will rip through that shield. So it's important that you're using the appropriate elemental damage against your enemies. And moving on to number 7, when you first boot up Destiny 2 and you get through the story a bit, the game starts to slowly open up. And then when you beat the game, it starts to open up even more. And it can be a bit overwhelming for someone who's never played Destiny before. So how exactly do the missions work, and how are you going to be grinding through to level up? There are a ton of different types of missions and activities in Destiny 2, and there will be even more things added in expansions. During the campaign, main missions, public events, and adventures are going to be your main source of gaining XP and dropping loot. Doing these consistently throughout the story will get you to about level 20 right around the end of the game. Adventures are essentially side quests, some being longer than others, and each one has a guaranteed reward, and it tells you what exactly that's going to be before you even start the adventure. Then we have public events, which are random missions that can pop up at any time, but unlike Destiny 1, here you can actually track when and where they're gonna pop up. I definitely recommend doing public events when you can, because when you beat them, you can drop a loot chest, and in that loot chest there's a ton of different rewards that you can get, either a class relic, or sometimes even a weapon, or even reputation tokens, which you can hand into an NPC, and if you give them enough, they'll give you a reward. And after you beat the story, grinding is what you're going to be spending most of your time doing. You're going to want to focus on raising your power level. After you hit level 20, which is the level cap, your power level is what you're really going to want to be focusing on, because that's what matters from that point on. This is raised by getting more powerful weapons and armor. Their damage and defense is all rounded up into your power level. So you're going to be spending a lot of time rerunning a lot of the same stuff in hopes of dropping new and better gear, slowly raising your power level. And the absolute best way to grind for new loot is by running strikes, nightfalls, and raids, which leads us to our next point at number 6. What exactly are strikes, nightfalls, and raids? Starting off with strikes, this is essentially a longer mission, one that you have to do with friends that end with a boss, and one that's pretty difficult to beat. When you beat the boss, they're going to drop loot, and that loot is usually better than what you would drop during a normal main mission or even adventures and public events. There could be an elemental burn, meaning that every enemy is weak to a certain elemental damage, but also means that you're weak against that same damage type as well. So you have to be careful about what kind of damage your enemies are dealing to you. Nightfalls are also weekly, so there's a new one every week, and you can only run the Nightfall once per character each week. Nightfall's loot drop guarantees you a legendary drop with a chance of dropping a piece of exotic gear as well. So you're definitely going to make sure that you're running these Nightfalls at least once a week. Then finally there's the raid. The raid is kind of hard to put into words, but it's one of the cooler and harder things you'll do in Destiny. Raids are longer, with some taking hours to figure out if you don't know exactly how to complete them. Some have mini puzzles to figure out, some have platforming parts, and the bosses aren't just a plain old boss fight. There's a certain way to beat them, and the game doesn't hold your hand at all, so you have to figure all of this out by yourself, or with the help of friends. The raid also has loot that can only be dropped by completing the raid. And the raid gear is also the gear you need to get if you want to hit the max power level, because nothing else drops at a high enough level to get you there. And all of this is mostly what you'll be doing after you beat the game. This is the best way to drop really powerful and rare gear, and in my personal opinion, this is also where Destiny is at its most fun. Staying up until stupid AM trying to beat the raid on hard is very annoying and very difficult, but it's probably the most fun I've had playing Destiny. Moving on to number 5, you drop loot through killing and accomplishing things throughout the game, mostly through all the things I just mentioned. And all of these different pieces of loot are broken down into colors, each one representing different rarity. There's white, green, blue, purple, and yellow. They'll either drop in the form of like what it is exactly, or it'll drop as an encrypted engram, which then you need to get decrypted by the cryptarch back at the farm. Then there's Zer, who pops up at the farm only on the weekends and sells exotic weapons and armor, but he only accepts legendary shards. So throughout the week, you have to make sure you're trying to get as many shards as you can, and then go crazy on the weekend when Zer pops up, because it's one of the easiest ways to get your hands on exotic weapons and armor. And coming in at number 4, if you're into competitive multiplayer, Destiny has that for you too. There's Crucible, which is your basic multiplayer where your armor, weapons, perks, and power level doesn't matter. Everyone here is equal and no one has an advantage. Then there's Iron Banner, which pops up every so often, and here your power level, perks, weapons, and armor actually do matter. So if you aren't a high enough level, or if you really don't have that good of weapons or gear, maybe not jump in till you're ready. But it does drop Iron Banner exclusive gear, which is always really cool. It always looks awesome. Then there's Trials, which is like the PvP thing to do if that's what you're into. Just like Iron Banner, all your stats matter, but here it's elimination based. So your team needs to win X amount of rounds to not get eliminated from Trials. So if PvE isn't quite your thing, Destiny more than has you covered on the PvP end of things. And next up at number 3, I'm sure when you head down to your local video game store to buy Destiny 2, the cashier is probably going to bug you to also buy the expansion pass. It's at this point where you usually dismiss them, telling them no, season passes are silly and dumb and I don't want it. We've all been there before, but I think that with Destiny 2, you might want to at least think about it. Maybe don't purchase it right away, but don't write it off. Destiny 1 had some really good post-launch content, with the first one being sort of meh, but everything else after it actually being worth it, and it adding a lot to the overall game. And just like with MMOs and certain other types of games, if you don't get the newest expansion, it might kind of suck to play at that point, because a lot of stuff won't be available to you. Take the Taken King, for example. That added so much, and trying to play Destiny without buying it was just kind of silly. So don't write the expansion pass off immediately. See if you enjoy the game, and if you find yourself wanting more after you do all there is to do, maybe consider picking it up. Moving on to number 2, something that's been kind of redone but isn't totally new to Destiny 2 are clans. Clans were in Destiny 1, but they were only accessible through Bungie's site, and they really only ran like in the background. But now, here in Destiny 2, there's a full-fledged clan system. And what's really cool about this system is that your clan's actual performance can unlock rewards for you and the rest of your clan members. You can get a weekly engram, XP boost, additional glimmer, and other things. All of this is tied to your clan banner, which you get to make when you start your clan. We still don't have a ton of info on what else clans can do, and they also aren't even live yet, so we can't even test it out to see. Then there are guided games, which is added to help people playing alone get into fire teams to run the raid and nightfall strikes. It's like a form of matchmaking where you actually pick what you're trying to do, and Bungie matches you up with someone to play with. And it works both ways. You could be a seeker looking for a clan to help you raid, or you could be a guide, a clan looking to help a single player through a raid. Seeing that Destiny is a game based around community, I think the clan aspect overall and the addition of guided games was a really awesome move on Bungie's part. And finally, at number 1, there seems to be some confusion with some people with what Destiny 2 actually is. I've seen people thinking it's your basic single-player first-person shooter when it really is an entirely different game than that. You can definitely treat it as such. Playing through the campaign by yourself is fine. Running through some strikes alone is okay because you'll get to team up with other players via matchmaking to run them, and you could also run Crucible by yourself. But once you start messing around with the nightfalls, trials, and the raids, the game kind of changes and doesn't work too well as a single-player experience. Destiny 2 is definitely a game better experience with friends. The memories you form and the experience you have is kind of what makes Destiny Destiny, and it's that much better when you're playing with friends. I remember the first time I ran through Vault of Glass, which was Destiny 1's first raid. I remember who I was playing with at the time, I remember what loot I dropped, and I remember how excited I was to do it. The same goes for dropping a Gallahorn for the first time. I'll never have another video game moment that even comes close to dropping that super sought out galley. And there's a ridiculous story that goes along with me dropping it, and it's a story that me and my friends and I still talk about, like on a regular basis. And yeah, I know everything that I just said is super cheesy, but really it's all true. Destiny truly is a game that is based around community. Playing with friends or playing with new friends you met on Destiny is what Destiny is all about. And those are 10 things first-time Destiny 2 players should know, but we want to hear from you. Meet us down in the comments and let us know what you think. Have you guys already jumped into Destiny 2, and are you already overwhelmed? And if there are any experienced players watching, maybe throw some tips and tricks down in the comments for newcomers. And as I'm sure you guys already know, hitting the like button really helps us out. And if you're new here, subscribing is a good idea because we put out videos like this every single day. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.